All right, today we're going to talk about iNAV navigation mode tuning. And I'm not, now it went way up. So we'll see what that looks like in the log. Yeah, it's bouncy. You can hear it like, whoa, 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 whoa. We're going to talk about the variables that impact it, the OSD elements that you can turn on to kind of monitor it while you're doing some moves, the OSD menus you can use to tune it in the field, the flight moves you need to do to kind of evaluate your navigation mode tuning, how to look at the sensor accuracy that you're getting so you're not chasing the rabbit and it's really your sensors is the issue, and the differences between the position PIDs and the velocity PIDs and how you can recognize what maybe bad behaviors that you're experiencing are which do you need to address which bad behaviors. So it's a lot to cover, so let's get into it. If you're not familiar with iNAV navigation modes at all, I'm going to drop a video link up here in the upper right-hand corner. Check that out. It's where I cover some basic fundamental understanding of navigation modes. You'd want to pause this, check that out, and then come on back. Of course, to access the navigation mode settings, we're going to go under the PIDs tuning tab, and then we're going to make sure we hit up here. This will say hide or show all PIDs. We're going to go ahead and click that. And then down here at the bottom, here's all our navigation PIDs. Now, as we talked about before in the other video, you have two sets of PIDs that you have to deal with. One is the position PIDs. So you can see this here, the Z is the altitude. So you have Z position and Z velocity. You're also going to have the same for roll and pitch, which is X and Y for position and then velocity. There's different sensors that can go into this. That will be another video. You can have GPS, for example, get mixed in to adjust your altitude with a barometer or with sonar as well. So the more sensors you have and the closer you are to the ground, obviously with sonar, the more accurate it's going to be. For position, X and Y, that is basically just going to be GPS. So you only have one sensor there going in, and the quality of your GPS and how many satellites you have locked is going to have an impact on that. So we'll be able to show how you can assess if it's just bad positioning by your sensors or if it's, you know, your PID tune. That's the issue. We'll get into that a little bit later. But these are the two sets of PIDs. As previously talked about, don't let this throw you off in the Z position for altitude. You only have a P term, so ignore the zeros here for the integral and derivative. Those really should be grayed out. But we do have everything that has values above 0 here, and those are PIDs that are adjusting our position and altitude. Today's examples, we're going to focus on altitude hold just to kind of keep it simple, but all the same fundamentals and how it works in position hold. I might do a future video talking about position hold and how we can assess that. But today we're just going to really focus on altitude hold. Again, you can see the similarities between the two. They both have a position estimator. They both have velocity estimator. Everything we're going to talk about for today for the altitude is going to apply exactly the same for the position. Now, there's some great elements that you probably want to turn on in the OSD, and you can see they're under the RC adjustment values right here. You see we have position, and again, in this example, we're going to use Z position for altitude, but you'll see X and Y here as well for GPS position hold and just GPS navigation in general. You'd want to toggle these on. And then you see that's position, again, X and Y and Z, and then velocity, X and Y, and then also Z. You'd probably want to turn those on. Those are going to give you what your current PIDs are. It's really just going to help you for record keeping. So when you pull up some DVR and you want to line that up with some logs or something of that nature to troubleshoot a little bit more, you can see what the PID values are in relation to some of the output information you're getting as well. Now, in terms of output data, you can come down here to the PID controller outputs. And again, you'd want to turn these on here as well. Here you get the velocity X, the velocity Y, and the velocity Z. So these are not the position estimators, but you do have the position estimator down here below. So you'd want to turn these on. Again, it's covered in that previous video. FW stands for fixed wing. MC stands for multicopter. So we're going to be dealing with a quad in this example. So we're going to be only focusing on MC. As soon as you see FW and you're flying a multicopter or a drone or quadcopter, you're going to be able to ignore any of the FW stuff. Vice versa, if you're working on a fixed wing, you're going to be, of course, ignoring all the MC mode stuff that you're going to see here as well. As again touched upon in that previous video, the fixed wing mode for tuning is different. You don't have a velocity component to it. It's just the position. So you just have a position estimator and PIDs for that. It's a little simpler, honestly. Likewise, for tuning it in the field, you have great OSD menus that you can use as well. So if we go into the OSD with iNAV, you go directly under PID tuning here. And then from there, if you're interested in doing altitude stuff, you go into the altitude mag or magnetometer. So if your heading needs some adjustment, And if it's just the position holding, or you're tracking your courses and things of that nature for Mission Planner, then you're going to be going into the GPS navigation. So this is kind of moving around X and Y. This is moving up and down in the Z direction, and then also your magnetometer for your heading. Looking in the GPS first, of course, we have the position PIDs here. Again, with the zeros, you're going to want to ignore those because there really is no I or D term. Those really just shouldn't be here, or honestly, it'd be nice if they'd add an I term. But velocity, you have the PI and D, and then a feed forward component. And then likewise here in the altitude hold, you have the position. So this is out. This is actually the position stuff. So P, again, ignore the I and the D, and then the velocity, PI and D. And then this is the P term for the magnetometer. So now that we have everything set up, you have in your OSD some things turned on for the position, and have those set up so you can see the stuff and record that. And then you know where to access the stuff in the OSD menus as well. Another piece to the puzzle here is making sure you're not chasing a rabbit on a PID tune and your sensor accuracy is just off. And we have a way to evaluate that. So let's get outside and I'll show you what you need to do to that. And then some of the flight moves we're going to use to evaluate the current tune, which would most likely be the defaults, and kind of start threading the needle on, do you have a good PID tune for your position hold and altitude hold? My guess is probably not, but you'll see through this process what you need to evaluate to to see if that's right or not, or see if it's good, or see if it can be improved, or if your sensors are bad. You're going to be able to see all that good stuff. So let's get into it. So a big part of altitude holding is the sensor accuracy. So one thing I would recommend, so you're not trying to chase the rabbit in a PID tune when really your sensor accuracy is the core issue that you might be dealing with, is to take your FPV camera and put it in a straight or slightly downward facing mode, and then use the DVR from your goggles to record at the same time. You'll be able to overlay that with your BlackBox to see, okay, the quad is physically moving down to the ground. That's what I'm trying to get away from, or it's drifting up, or something of that nature. And then you can compare that with what we're seeing for the barometer or the altitude measurements. So another thing you want to do is have a frame of reference. So in this scenario, I'm going to turn around and face the house here so that the house can act as a frame of reference for altitude stuff. So I have altitude hold here on this switch. So when I flip that into this mode here, then you'll see it will lock into altitude hold. I do have it so that once it's in altitude hold mode, mid throttle is where my level is, but I also have the dead band for that turned all the way up to 250. So I have some room to spare here. So it really honestly basically covers my hover throttle as soon as I put it in altitude mode, but I'd have to move this up or down quite a bit before it would actually raise or lower, which is what I would recommend, because you really want it to not be climbing or declining for when you're doing the moves we're about to move. You want it to make sure it's holding the same altitude hold position, so that any variance you see is definitely a PIDs or more sensor issue. So I have the OSD going here as well, and that should record. If not, we'll be taking a second flight on this, so hopefully that will happen here, because I'm just doing a line of sight. So I have the goggles sit over there to record once we arm.
Engines armed.
Back it up here a little bit. Of course, there has to be a leaf that got caught in it. No worries. So what we're going to do here, I'm going to flip it in out to hold mode there, and now we're just going to let it sit there in altitude hold mode for a little bit. So you're seeing the house, and you can see I'm not, I have the throttle stick basically right where it needs to be, but and you can see there's a slight yaw. Maybe that's that leaf, but you can see it's climbing a little bit, still climbing, and then it's now descending. So now the next thing we want to do with this is just do some moves back and forth. So you can kind of see, try to hold it as steady as possible in the same position. You can see I'm not bringing it down. It's doing that all on its own. It's climbing all on its own. And that kind of variance is most likely just the sensor.
Nope.
And that's the variance in the sensor and the noise in the signal.
Nope.
So if that's the kind of stuff you're looking to make better, well, it's a little tricky because you'll need to increase your sensor accuracy. In this one, we just have a barometer, so I don't have GPS, so I only have one sensor controlling the whole thing. Now the next thing we're going to do is just do some inputs here to actually get some step responses on this. So just going to go back and forth, and let's do that. So just going back and forth. Just I'm not, normally you'd have to increase the throttle to do these moves. The quad is doing that all on its own. That makes it a little difficult because I'm not exactly able to hold it steady, but now you can see it's rising quite a bit. Now it's coming back down, it's falling. And that's most likely due to the increased air pressure that the barometer is reading from going back and forth.
Nope.
Now I'm just sitting steady again. That's holding pretty good there. So now that we're on the same page for the moves that you need to do, which is really just holding it steady and does it stay steady, and also start to do basically some stepped inputs back and forth, and does it, how does that velocity, we're going to show that a little bit more about the velocity PIDs here in a second. But you can do some things just by make some simple observations in the field while the flight moves are happening. It's not so easy for the step moves. It's a little harder for that, but it is for the position stuff. Just example here, when you're looking at this video, at the one point in that flight, the quad started kind of going up into the air, ascending. And, the simple thing is, does this number go up? Because if this number is not going up and it's ascending, then that's a sensor issue. But you can see in the video, I mentioned that, yeah, it might be a sensor issue, or it's a sensor issue. I wasn't kind of observing this in the moment, but no, it's not, because you can see this number going up. It'd be nice to get a little bit more accuracy on that, and maybe that's a setting I can adjust.
Nope.
You can also be observant of some other things, for example, the position estimator right here. So it's reporting the position adjustment that it wants to see here as a -115. And that's, this is probably the X, Y, and then Z in this OSD element. So you can see that as this is trending up, here, that the quad, and it's actually getting it trended down now, it's going back down. You can see it was trending it up as it was going up, and it was pushing negative down, that things are working. The quad is going up. It shouldn't be. The altitude is increasing, and this is a negative piece or component here trying to push it back down. It's taking too long. It's not pushing hard enough. Well, that's an indicator there, what we need to adjust. So that would be an adjustment simply on the P term for the position estimator for the altitude hold. So you can see in this flight, which is handy again to have those PIDs up, that the P position estimator for the Z term is at 50. Is the PID value for the P. Again, there is no I and no D, so those are irrelevant. Looking in the firmware, that would be this value that would update that. And you can see I'm pushing up to around 200 to get a forceful enough push to the velocity PIDs to say, hey, it's going off track. Push that thing up or down to get things corrected. Or if you're working with the OSD, you're going to go into the alt mag PIDs right here under the PID tuning. And then that is your value right here, the alt P term, which you can see again here, I push that up. It's the same thing. It's the same value. So if you push it up in one, it's up in the other, and vice versa. So that brings us to probably the big major point here. If it's not sensor related, it is most likely your P terms on the position estimator that need to be increased. They're probably a little light in iNAV's default for safety. They seem to need to be a fairly hefty amount to keep that position, especially for altitude hold. So again, any slow altitude increase where it will then come back down, or descending and same thing. Or if it's a slow kind of coming off course and then maybe comes hopefully back in, like sometimes it holds position, but sometimes it gets maybe pushed off and then it comes back. You're really going to want to focus on two things: is your sensor accuracy, which we talked about right here, how you can kind of monitor that in your OSD during the flight, or in logs as well. And secondarily, you most likely want to be pushing up that P gain for that position estimator to get that locked in a little bit more. Now, if you go too high on the position estimator, which you can go crazy, I set it all the way up at 255 for the altitude hold one, and it was fine. And that's as high as you can go. You can't go anything higher than 255. It's a programming component to it. So if you go too high, you'll start to get like a slow wobble. Like you'll hear like a whoa, whoa, whoa. Very slow, not a fast, rapid wobble. But if you see here, like as it's, kind of like overshooting back and forth a lot in a position, or in a altitude mode, it's kind of like bouncing a little bit. And it's very slow. You can almost just hear it. You can't even see it. It's more just hear it. You can hear the motors kind of whoa, whoa, whoa. Then that would be probably a little too high. But don't be afraid that, again, you can just flip it out of these test modes if things start to go awry. But don't be afraid to get generous with those position estimator P gains to keep things on track. Now, the next piece to this is the velocity estimator. And in this example for altitude hold, what we're doing is doing basically step moves back and forth. Now, by going back and forth, since we're changing the thrust column to not going straight down, that essentially is providing a step move for altitude, for holding altitude, because you're pushing that thrust column out to the side. Well, it needs to ramp the motors up to compensate for that, to hold the same altitude. So if it has to ramp the motors up and then ramp the motors back down once you come straight again, that's a stepped input. This one's a little trickier to tune without BlackBox in my estimation. So I'm going to use BlackBox to take a look at that. I would probably recommend the same. I'm struggling yet on how to do it without BlackBox, but I'm open to input. Generally for iNAV, for at least the altitude hold, it's a little overshooty, but let's take a look at what I'm talking about here and how we can tune that in. So as of the recording of this video, this is a special build of BlackBox where I fixed up the scaling for all the graphs so they come all lined up so you can make some sense of the data a little way easier, actually. I will drop a link down below where you can download that special build. If you're watching this video in the future, I have contributed those changes into the BlackBox repository. So I think it looks like PAL tagged them as version 7 of BlackBox Explorer, should have this stuff built in. The other piece to this is we're going to be using trace templates that I've developed for setting all these traces up over here. Those can be found on my website, theuavtech.com/blackbox. Patrons will be able to download those, and then you can play along with this. So to start taking a look at this, of course, we're going to open up the BlackBox file, and then I have the DVR on here along with the OSD information. And then we're going to go to trace template 4, and that's what I'm on here as well. So you just press 4 in the numbers that are above your keyboard, not in a keypad on the side, and that will bring this up. We're going to look into the position estimator and then the velocity estimator down here, and then this is the output to the motors. So the first things first, again, just driving home this position estimator, go ahead and hit the plus on that. And you can see when we were in that zone where this was going up to around 9 feet, you can see that reflected here. Here's the barometer. Now this is in meters, so you have to, you can just see the general trend, but you can see the barometer starting to measure a increased altitude, which we can physically see is accurate. Again, that's why doing the DVR part or just being observant in the field is key, because if you're just looking at a log, you don't, like, what is really happening? You need to see, is this physically occurring? And then with that, you can see we have the target position, which never changes because I never move the altitude, what it's supposed to be at, up or down. But the navigation position up and down, you can see is trending up with the barometer, that the barometer is impacting that. Down here is our P position PIDs, our output. And you can see that that is pushing to go down. It's below this dashed line. So that means it's saying, hey, quad, go down. If we want to make that faster, so it doesn't, once it starts to go off course, like back here, it pushes down harder here so that it doesn't get this far off track. You have to increase those P gains to do that. And you can increase them quite a bit. So you can see in an example here, after taking that from 50 up to 255, which is the max. Now I did then bring that down to 200. It was getting a little woo, 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 woo. You can see it kind of overshooting here a little bit, but you can see how much deviation we were getting between the burnt orange and this cyanish kind of line color here. It's kind of a purple, light purple. Let's go with light purple. That line and this burnt line, that we're trying to, have that deviation not be there because that's an altitude differential. And you can see over here that we're not getting that in this scenario here. So after we have, the bottom line is once you get to the spot where your position navigation for X, Y, or Z is following the target here, then any other deviation outside that point is just sensor inaccuracy, because this is it can only do as well as the information it's getting. So that's what you're going to see there. And you can see how much harder these P gains are pushing. As soon as it starts to go off track, they're really pushing down quite a bit more than you're seeing over here as well. Do be cautious when you are comparing one log to another. Do look at some values, because this is scaled based off the furthest extent, I think, of the P gain. And then same thing over here. So it's scaled, everything's scaled here. I think it's the P gain. It might, I can double check, but the scaling between logs may change depending on how the furthest extent of the moves that you're doing. It's not like it's the same all the time, because we have to deal with, especially for altitude, is, are you doing this stuff all close to the ground where all your altitudes are really tight, or are you going way up in the air? So this range might have to deal with, quite a bit, from like 0 to, I don't know, 400 meters, and then put that all in this log space, or where this is only doing like not even more than 10 meters, like 5 or 6 meters within that log space. So it scales between each log, but it will scale all the stuff together at least. Now flipping to the velocity estimator, and you can see it's kind of the same color scheme that I have set up in my trace templates that you can go download. The velocity target is the burnt orange, and then we have this light purple here as the actual velocity it's measuring. And then you kind of compare those, and you can see that the P, I, and D and feed forward, but there actually is no feed forward in altitude hold, at least, is trying to make those two lines follow each other. Well, this gets into just basic PID tuning fundamentals. So if you're not familiar with the relationships between all the PIDs, again, I will drop a link down below. You need to go to my uavtech.com/PID tuning. There's a short video there. You need to understand the relationships between PIDs and how this works. The P term pushes everything. The D term fights any movement back and forth, even stepped inputs by the controller. It just doesn't want to move. It's like a shock absorber. And the I term is trying to work on longer lead times to push things up, but it's very sluggish. So you don't want the I term controlling things, because it will tend to drag things to overshoot. So you really want the P term getting things on track. The I term is just for persistent error that it works on. And you got to kind of thread the needle here and use your PID tuning mojo to understand this. But at the end of the day, when I look at something like this and you see that this line here is overshooting and then overshooting, and they're fast overshoots, then that's a P term overshoot. If it's a long trended overshoot like this, see how that's kind of like a long trended overshoot? That's an I term overshoot. So you're trying to you got to understand how it works. Again, you're looking kind of at the P term shape, which is the red line here, and then the overshoot. If they look similar to each other, then that is the gain. That's the problem. If it's too high. If you're seeing the I term shape, see how that I term shape looks, and you're seeing that shape kind of looks similar, then that is the I term that's causing that overshoot. If you have an I term overshoot, you have to reduce the I term in relation to the P term. So they're related to each other, I and P. It's the relation, it's the scenario, the ratio between those two. If you have a P term overshoot, you have to reduce the P term in relation to the D term. So there's a relationship between the P and the D. So P and I are connected, P and D are connected. And that's what that video will talk about, those relationships between those terms. So when I'm looking at this, I have two issues. I see an I term overshoot and I see P term overshoot. So I need to bring the relationship between the I and the P down. So reduce the P gain or the I gain in relation to the P gain, and then also reduce the P gain in relation to the D gain, or just increase the D gain. That would cause that as well. You might hear other advice out there like, oh, well, D is dampening. You just increase D dampening for everything. It's like, no, that's not how that works. D, well, that will make your P term overshoot go away, but then it will make your I term overshoot worse because it's going to make the I term control the controller or control the movements more. So it's going to, you'll have these longer wobble overshoots because of just increasing the D term. So those relationships matter. These aren't, that you got to really know that stuff. So in making adjustments to those gains, you can see the difference between these, how much less P term overshoot we have, these sharp overshoots, and how much less I gain overshoot we have as well. There's a little bit of I gain overshoot here yet as well. See how this looks right there? We can make this a little bit bigger. But you can see how this trend looks a little bit like that. Yeah, a little bit too much yet. This I'm not, so this get a little, yeah, this again, it's subtle. I'm right on the brink here. I think I have it kind of right at the ratios, but I probably could bring down the I term a little bit less in relation to the P term, and also bring the P term down a little bit less in relation to the D term. In the velocity estimator, if you go too high with your D terms and you go into altitude hold or position hold, you will see a fast wobbling. Like it will go wobble, 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 back and forth, or on the pitch or the roll, whichever has too high the D term, and could get out of control. Same thing for if you put it in the altitude hold mode and you see it going whoa, 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 just up, real down, real quick. First, it's going to heat your motors up, so don't do it forever. And secondarily, that is definitely the D gain. That's the problem. So you kind of found your D limit. Well, if you found your D term limit, then that relationship between the D and the P is going to set your P term limit, and that relationship between the P and the I is going to set your I term limit. So that's essentially as good as you can get to tracking. Once you find that D limit, find that P limit, and then the D limit. Again, you can adjust the ratios in between them all and then just move your PID gains all up and down. For that, I do have a tool at theuavtech.com/PIDCalc. And in here, you can type in your PID gains. So say I want to do 50 and then 50 and then 10. And then from there, I want to move them all up or down by a certain value. You can see that it would show me my new value here. So if I put 2 here, these would be my new gains, holding the ratio between these. And then I can adjust the ratios here if I wanted to tweak this and say, okay, well, I need my P to be half as much related to my D gain. I can do that. And my I gain, I need to be a little bit less, or 25% less, which would be 0.75 in relation to my, not 0.75, 0.75 in relation to my I gains. And you can see what those gains would show here. Maybe that would probably be more appropriate to be that value. And then you can put those new gains in there and then come back to this. You can pull this up on your mobile phone so you can do this stuff in the field as well. I will drop a link down to another video where I uploaded the post-flight for after the PID tune on this, and you can see the results, but just reviewing in the log file, you can see here, this is the default. So we're kind of going off course here. I can exaggerate that a little bit more by doing that. Going off course there, just in the normal position, out hold. Keep in mind for velocity, if you're just holding steady and not really pushing the quad a lot, then your velocity PIDs probably really don't matter that much. It's really just your position estimator PID, the P term, because you can see there's not much activity. It's like saying, well, on a PID tune, what's my perfect PID tune for just a cruising quad? It's like, well, you're not really putting a lot of stress on the PID controller, so it kind of doesn't really matter. But you can see here how it easily is following the target for the velocity PIDs. It's just my position is that the P gain's not high enough. Now, when I really start to and again, this is the default. When I really start to exercise it, you can see I'm getting the overshooting, some I term overshoot, some P term overshoot, like we talked about before, which is then, of course, throwing it off course for the position hold, which is the vertical in this case. Now let's compare that to after doing the PID tune. Now, the only difference between this and the final is I had my position P gain really high, as high as it could go. And you can see here that that was fine when just holding steady. Again, let's turn on Expo here to make sure it's apples to apples. But you can see how tight we're getting a position hold there. And so any deviation after that is really just the accuracy level of the barometer, which is my sensor data, which is only the barometer in this case. Again, here, as likewise before, it's following the velocity is following these gains, these set points, no problem there. It's got a little bit more to do because this is a tighter hold up top here. And then you can see as I go into my step moves for my velocity PIDs, where we're really starting to lean on this, that this is a lot tighter and not as much overshooting and erraticness. And again, that's resulting in up here. Now, ultimately, I settled at a PID gain of 200 for my position PIDs for the altitude. And you can see here that kind of that wobble. And if you go down and check out that link to that video, I talk about it, you know, when I do the post flight of this stuff. And you can hear that kind of that whoa, whoa, whoa. When I go back and forth, you can kind of hear going, whoa, whoa. And then it goes to the other side and goes, whoa, whoa, whoa. So you can kind of hear what you can see right here. But you know, it following this is, again, much tighter than the default. And these gains are radically different than what you get, you know, getting out of the box 4 or 5 inch quad. And I suspect as you go into larger quadcasts, this would hold true for those as well. Okay, so a lot of information, probably a longer video. Hopefully that helps. If you really enjoyed this kind of content, can I remind you that I do have a Patreon, but it really is a motivator, and I'd appreciate any of the support, a couple bucks a month, if that's something you can fare. I do plan on doing navigation PID presets that I will be putting on my website /theuavtech.com. That's going to be available to patrons. I already have those for quadcopters, for the PIDs to fly the craft outside of, you know, position navigation. If you're interested in those, again, I'll drop that link down below. Those are for patrons. And again, I'm going to expand that into having navigation PIDs as well. If you do need any assistance or have any questions going forward, I'll drop another link down to my Discord and my iNAV thing. I would love to get some more experience with what other people are seeing out there. So that involves me helping out. So please don't hesitate to put those down there and tag me if you have some black box of some position stuff. Again, need that DVR and some other stuff. Make sure you're recording the logs. Stuff like that would be great. But outside of all that, thanks everybody. Hope this helps, and I'll see you on the next one.